Okay, well, welcome to everyone who is joining for this final installment of our rabbinic intern Steve Gotlib's three-part series on reading and interpreting the stories of Rabba Bar Chana. So, what rabbinic intern, what Steve is not, I don't know if he told you or didn't tell you, but many of his lessons were inspired by Rabbi Bezalel Naor's recent book on the legends of Rabba Bar Chana. Rabbi Naor is a lifelong student of the, hold on, the bio I was reading disappeared. Rabbi Naor is a lifelong student of the teachings of Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook. He translated Rav Kook's seminal work, Orot, in 2015, and our shul has that translation on the in the chapel, in the chapel bookshelf. So if you want to peruse that, you are welcome to, as well as several other books by Rav Kook. He's also the author of original studies of Jewish thought in both English and Hebrew. And most recently, he published a book entitled Dance Circle for the Righteous, a comparative analysis of the cosmologies of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto and the Chabad Hasidic interpreter, Rabbi Isaac of Homel. He is presently at work on a historical novel as well as a collection of mystical poems. Anyway, when Rabbi Naor's publisher, Kodesh Press, heard that we were having a series inspired by his book, they suggested that Rabbi Naor himself join us and tell us a little bit about his studies of Rav Kook and Rabbi Nachman and those Agadot. And so, Rabbi Naor, we're delighted to have you join us. I thought that Rabbi Naor lived in Israel. Turns out he lives in, his heart lives in Israel, but his body currently resides in Muncie, just a short drive down from Albany. So were it not for this situation, this could have been really an in-person class at our shul, maybe sometime in the future. And I'm delighted to also invite Steve Gotlib, who will direct and lead a conversation with Rabbi Naor as they teach about these Agadot. So thank you so much, Steve, for orchestrating this, and Rabbi Naor for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much, Rabbi Feldman, for giving so many opportunities for learning and teaching within the community. It's been really lovely so far, and I'm sure it will continue to be throughout the year. And thank you so much to Rabbi Naor for joining us tonight, and to Kodesh Press for really making the shidduch in this case, for being so kind as to send me this book, actually when it was an advanced reader's copy. It's really been phenomenally helpful for myself. I've posted the link to it in the chat because I would be remiss to if I didn't say that Kodesh Press has offered a 15% discount for everyone who was present at this shir with the promo code Sinbad. I will put that in the chat as well. If anyone is interested in purchasing this book afterwards, to have these stories and Rav Kook's comments, as well as Rabbi Naor's wonderful appendixes and footnotes to it, it's simply remarkable, and I'd highly, highly recommend it. Without further ado, this evening is going to be really in three parts. The first part will be Rabbi Naor sharing about Rav Kook, about his experiences with Rav Kook's thoughts, particularly Rav Kook's approach to Agadah, both as it relates to Rabba Bar Chana and in general, how he sees Haggadah, what the place of Agadah is in a Jewish framework. I'll be then sharing a little bit about Rabbi Nachman and bring it into a greater view of how Agadah can be looked at, why Agadah is important as halakha in our lives. And anyone who wants to ask questions on either of those can put them in the chat. I'll be reading through them. And the last little bit can be answering those questions between the two of us. So please feel free, any questions, any comments you have to put in the chat, and I'll be looking through them as we go through. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome and thank once again Rabbi Naor for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi Gottlieb. It's also Rabbi Feldman and Kahal Kadosh. It's truly a great honor to share Torah. And we're soon approaching Chag HaUrim, Chanukah, Festival of Lights. And I hope this will be sort of a preamble to light up our spirits, our souls, our neshamot. I was thinking how to structure the presentation, and usually I proceed in chronological order. And in the case of Rav Kook, I'd have to start back in the late 1800s when he first started to write on Agadah. Let me just turn off the cell so we don't have any nudnikus. But tonight, I think I'll work backwards. I want to give you two Talmudim of Rav Kook. One is more famous than the other, and both of them received from Rav Kook this this love of Agadah. The more famous one is Rav Yitzchak Hutner. He wrote a series entitled Pachad Yitzchak on the cycle of the year, the Moadim, the festivals. He was a Rosh Yeshiva for many years of Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn. And when he was a young man, he came under the influence of Rav Kook in Yerushalayim. And you're seeing in Pachad Yitzchak some kind of refraction of the light of Rav Kook, this this love of and fascination with Agadah. The other student, and it's possible none of you have heard of him, he's a very mysterious figure who continues to intrigue us to this day. He would go by the name of Shoshani. In Paris, he was Monsieur Shoshani. And there's a lot of literature about him. There's soon to be released a film trying to figure out who this mysterious character was. He wandered about Europe and North Africa, and he's buried in Uruguay, outside of Montevideo. And he bequeathed his derech halimud, his peculiar approach to studying Agadah, to a man who went on to become a very famous French existentialist philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas. And perhaps none of you have heard of Levinas. But someone you've all heard of is Elie Wiesel. Okay. So Elie Wiesel and Emmanuel Levinas and André Naor and Leon Ashkenazi, they're all young men after the Holocaust in Paris. And there showed up in town this very enigmatic teacher. And he took them under his wing, and Wiesel was entranced by him, and Leon Ashkenazi, André Naor. But the one who preserved the derech halimud, the methodology, is Levinas, who wore two hats. Besides being an existential philosopher in the tradition of Heidegger, I know, was also a teacher of Talmud, but not halacha. He would teach the Agadot, and his teachings on the Agadot are preserved in his works. There's Kat Lecture Talmudic and Cinq Lecture Talmudic. They've been translated into English. In fact, someone who used to reside in Albany, Professor Richard Sugarman, I don't know if that name rings a bell with anybody today, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Vermont in Burlington, translated some of Levinas's work into English. But anyway, my point is This is the tail end of Rav Kook's influence, pouring into Rav Hutner, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, Pachad Yitzchak, and also into this mysterious Monsieur Shoshani. And you can see what Levinas does with Agadah. He treats it as a literary unit. So rather than the passage in the Talmud just being a random collection of sayings of the rabbis, this rabbi says this, and that rabbi says that, he treats it as a coherent literary unit, and it's amazing what he does with it. But all of this came out of the Kapila of Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. Now, today in Yerushalayim, there's a big yeshiva, Yeshivat Har Hamor, headed by Rav Tzvi Tau. Who's Rav Tzvi Tau? Rav Tzvi Tau is the Talmid of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kohen Kook, who was the Ben Yachid, the only son of Avram Yitzchak Kohen Kook, the famous chief rabbi of Israel. I, as a young man, had the privilege of studying with Rav Tzvi Yehuda one-on-one in the privacy of his home. What they study over in Har Hamor, besides Talmud, which is the Ikar, that's the main study, is halacha, but something that's a favorite of Yeshivat Har Hamor and Rav Tzvi Tau is the Sefer, Ein Hayah. Ein Hayah is Rav Kook's commentary to Ein Yaakov. What is Ein Yaakov? Ein Yaakov is a collection of all the Agadot of the Talmud. It was produced in the early 1500s by Rabbi Yaakov ibn Habib. It was first published in Salonika in 1515. And it's always been a favorite of the Jewish people. And what's beautiful about Ein Yaakov is it speaks to all Jews. You know, when we get into the realm of halacha, not all Jews are capable of studying the intricacies of, the intricacies of halacha. For some of us, it's too much. It goes over our heads. But what's been a mainstay, a favorite of the Jewish people, starting in 1515 in Salonika, is Ein Yaakov, a collection of the legends of the Talmud, and it speaks to everyone. Ein Hayah is Rav Kook's commentary to Ein Yaakov. Hayah stands for Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen. It translates as the eye of the falcon. Hayah is a bird, a falcon. And we're up to 4 volumes now through Masechet Shabbat, but we don't have all of Masechet Shabbat. Since then, bits and pieces have been published over the years, and perhaps there'll be more volumes of Ein Hayah, but I don't know that for a fact. So, you know, if you're living in Yerushalayim, I think it might be every Thursday night, something like that. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to inflate figures, you know, but hundreds and hundreds from all over Yerushalayim will pack into this Yeshivat Har Hamor. The Yeshiva is Rav Tzvi Tau, and they will hear how Rav Tzvi Tau explains Ein Hayah. A couple of years ago, I had a visitor to my home from that yeshiva. He was sent to me as a shaliach of Rav Tzvi Tau for whatever reason. And he was quoting to me Ein Hayah by heart. The way I quote from the Talmud, he quotes from Ein Hayah. So it became for them a supremely important limud. You know, this is their, I don't know what to call it, their Bible, Ein Hayah. At a very young age, Rav Kook decided that he's going to make his mark in the Jewish world in the field of Agadah, not halacha. Don't get me wrong, Rav Kook was a great halachist. He was a great posek. When he was the chief rabbi of Israel, She'elot in halacha, questions of practical halacha were addressed to him from the four corners of the globe, sort of like Rav Moshe Feinstein in this country. So he was a great halachist, but very on in his career, he came to the realization that he really doesn't have anything original to contribute in the way of methodology of halacha. He studied in the Volozhin Yeshiva for a year. There he became close to, of course, the Rosh Yeshiva, the Netziv, but also Reb Chaim Halevi Soloveitchik, later known as Reb Chaim Brisker. He was a young Rosh Yeshiva at the time, and he was making his mark in the field of halacha. It's called the Brisker Derech, the Brisker method of analysis, how to analyze a sugya in the Talmud. And that really revolutionized the study of Talmud in the Lithuanian yeshivot, the much vaunted Brisker Derech. Rav Kook realized that he can't match Reb Chaim in innovating and revolutionizing how to study halacha, but where he can input, where he can make his contribution is in the realm of Agadah. And you're getting that in this Einayah. And his methodology left its mark on his Talmidim. And as I said, there was one here in Brooklyn, Rav Yitzchak Hutner. There was one wandering the globe, Shoshani. And I want to read to you an appraisal of Rav Kook's personality by Rav Yitzchak Arieli. Rav Yitzchak Arieli wrote a very important work on the Talmud, Einaim L'Mishpat. His grandson, Rav Osher Arieli, is the great Rosh Yeshiva in Mir. And this is what Rav Arieli had to say about Rav Kook. In halacha, Rav Kook was one of the greats of the generation. But in Agadah, in the totality of the Torah, in philosophy, especially in Kabbalah, here Rav Kook was unique in his generation. Okay. So that gives you a very good summation of who Rav Kook is and what made him so stellar and outstanding. He had it all. He was a genius in halacha. He was a genius in Agadah, in philosophy, in Kabbalah, in poetry, not in storytelling. So you want to know how Rav Kook views Agadah, its place in Judaism. I guess that's really the question we're supposed to deal with. Before Rav Kook, his Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv of Volozhin, writes something called Kidmat HaEmek. It's his introduction to his commentary to the Shiltot, the Rav Achai Gaon. That commentary is entitled Hamek Sha'ala, and the introduction is Kidmat HaEmek. And there, the Netziv comes out with this brilliant, I'm not going to call it history. It's more, maybe we'll call it intellectual history. He traces through the generations 2 lines. And these 2 lines come out of a pasuk. This is a pasuk in Parashat Shoftim. כי פלא ממך דבר למשפט בין דם לדם, בין דין לדין, בין נגע לנגע, דברי ריבות בשירך, וקמת ועלית למקום אשר יבחר השם אלוקיך בו, ובאת אל הכהנים הלוויים ואל השופט אשר יהיה בימים ההם. ודרשת ויגידו לך את דבר המשפט. Which means if you have a question of practical Jewish observance, what do? You go up to Jerusalem, although Jerusalem is not named, but that place will eventually be revealed as Jerusalem. And there are 2 characters, 2 personalities, 2 figures there. One is called Hashofet, and the other is HaKohen. Okay, let's do that. Let's revisit that verse. Uvata el HaKohanim HaLeviyim ve'el HaShofet asher yeh b'yamim hahem. So you'll arrive in Jerusalem, and there are 2 parallel bodies, covalent bodies, and one is called the Kohen, and the other is the Shofet. What is the difference between them? So the Netziv explains the Kohen has Ruach HaKodesh. He has divine inspiration. The Shofet goes on cold logic. So these are 2 different approaches. These are 2 ways to solve the problem, whatever your problem is. You can consult the Kohen, who is receiving some influx of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine inspiration, or you can consult with the Shofet, who goes on cold logic. This introduction of the Netziv, Kidmat HaEmek, evidently had a profound influence on Rav Kook. And Rav Kook, like his Rebbe, quotes that pasuk. But he takes it to places that the Netziv didn't go to. Rav Kook believes that coming out of the Kohen, or coming out of Nevuah, prophecy, eventually you will get Agadah. Coming out of the Shofet proceeds Halacha. And the place to look for this is a letter that Rav Kook wrote to a Jewish historian of the day. His name was Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Rabinowitz. He wrote a series of multi-volume series of Jewish history called Dorot HaRishonim. And today, very few people are looking in Halevi or Rabinowitz's works, but at the time, they made a very important statement, because until he came along, Jewish history had been commandeered by the non-Orthodox. You had Heinrich Gretz, or Tzvi Gretz, who started as a Talmud of Reb Shamshon Fol Hirsch. In fact, he was a Ben Bayit. He lived by Hirsch in the home, but he eventually there was a distance between Hirsch and his Talmud Gretz. Another one was Isaac Hirsch Weiss. Another one was Yom Tov Lipman Suntz. These were the people who really controlled Jewish history. And much of what Rabinowitz or Yitzchak Isaac Levi is doing, Dorot HaRishonim, is attempting to refute their history. Now, Rav Kook is living in Yafo. He writes to Rabinowitz. It's Tevet Tavresh Samachet. That's 1908. And he conveys to him that we have to attempt some kind of unification of Chochmat HaGadah and Chochmat HaLacha. And writes what I told you, the difference between the Kohen and the Shofet, and that you need both of them, and that they're covalent institutions. And he shares with Rabinowitz his find. He found something, Rav Kook, which he considered an amazing discovery. And I'll let you judge if it's truly amazing. We have what's known as Zaken Mamreh. There's the end of Masechet Sanhedrin. There's a concept of Zaken Mamreh, where all the other members of the Sanhedrin hold one way, and this one fellow refuses to go along with them. He's called a rebellious elder, Zaken Mamreh. And it goes very badly for him. We mete out to him capital punishment. But there's a difference now between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. The Bavli lays out different things for which he's liable. And when it comes to the word davar, ki palei mimcha davar, remember that pasuk in Shoftim? Davar is the key word. So davar is translated by Bavli as halacha. But davar, that same word, davar, is translated by the Yerushalmi as agadah. And for Rav Kook, this is marvelous, because if you study Chovot HaLevavot by Bachya ibn Pakuda, Duties of the Heart, he tells you, well, what is that book all about? It's Chovot HaLevavot versus Chovot HaEvarim, the duties of the heart versus the duties of the limb. And in the introduction, he says that Agadah or Machshava, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, was never legislated. It doesn't come under this rubric that we're talking about. No Zaken Mamreh was ever brought up for a dissenting opinion in the realm of Agadah. Says Rav Kook, Bachya ben Pakuda only looked in the Bavli, evidently. He never consulted the Yerushalmi. Had he consulted the Yerushalmi, he would have found out that according to the Yerushalmi, you could be a Zaken Mamreh for going up against the majority opinion in the realm of Agadah. Now, what does it mean? That we'll actually execute you for that? No. But the idea exists that that you can be a Zaken Mamreh in Jewish thought, in Jewish philosophy, as well as in Jewish law. Something else that Rav Kook is doing in the letter, and if you want to read the letter, by the way, some of the letters of Rav Kook have been translated into English by Tzvi Feldman, letters of A.Y. Cohen Cook. It has a haskama of Rab Nachum Rabinovich, who recently passed away. It was Rab Nachum Rabinovich. Okay, but everybody knows Jonathan Sachs, right? Alav Shalom. So a couple of months before Rabbi Sachs passed, his Rebbe, Rab Nachum Rabinovich, passed away. He had a yeshiva in Malay Adumim, and they published this work by Tzvi Feldman, the letters of Rav Kook. Hopefully you can get a hold of it. So some of the best letters in the Igrot Raya, in the collected letters of Rav Kook, have been translated to English, some of them. I don't recall whether this particular letter was published, but if you get a hold of Igrot Raya, Volume 1, it's letter 103. It starts on page 122. It's a long letter. It finishes on page 129, but what you really need are pages 123 and 124. Rabbi Gotlib, I don't want to take up all your time, so you tell me when.
If we would want to maybe spend a few minutes talking specifically about Rav Kook's approach to Haggadah, maybe that would be helpful for 10 minutes or so, and then I'll take from there.
You know, a lot of what I've told you tonight comes out of an article that I published many years ago. If you can see that. Rav Kook's role in the rebirth of Haggadah. It's in a journal, wrote a multidisciplinary journal of Judaism, volume 1, 1991. There's only one volume, so it can't be mistaken for another volume.
Very optimistic journal title.
Well, you know, when you're young, you have dreams, and some of them come to fruition, and others peter out. I want to read to you something that I wrote, but I think Rav Kook would give his approval. Let me just get a sip of water. Okay, the Judaism of the Galut is fearful of Agadah. It does not trust subjective spirituality. It knows what destruction torrents of false prophets and floodwaters of self-deluded messiahs caused in the past, and it would rather tread the terra firma of objectifiable reality, id est halacha. But is the ground of halacha, unwatered by well springs of divine inspiration, really as safe as it seems? What if that ground becomes so parched and dry that it cracks and buckles? Vai da'avdin lo raita yabasha. Woe to those who make the Torah dry ground, warns Tikkunei Zohar. Employing the admonition of the Tikkunei Zohar as a motto, Rabbi Chaim Vital, in the introduction to Etz Hayim, appeals for the study of Kabbalah. Rav Kook follows suit, not by calling for Kabbalah per se, but for re-examination of the entire gamut of Jewish thought, whether it be Agadah, philosophy, Kabbalah, Hasidut, or Musar, hitherto neglected. So, Rav Kook believed that one of the prime reasons that young Jews were leaving Judaism by droves in his day was that Judaism was all about pots and pans. He actually writes that. You know, the whole thing centered on the kitchen. What happens if a milchik spoon falls into a pot of a fleishik soup, and that was the whole religion, and it didn't speak to the soul of a young Jew, and they left by droves. So what Rav Kook realized very early in the game is, if we want to hold on to our youth, we've got to present them with a Judaism which is alive, which is vital, which resonates with them, which speaks to their heart and their soul. And, you know, the Brisker Derech HaLimud is a wonderful intellectual form of gymnastics. I love it. But it speaks to my head. it doesn't speak to my heart. So when I'm looking for a Judaism of the heart, where am I to go? So that's where people like Rav Kook and Rav Nachman and the Alter Rebbe, and even the Kabbalah of the Vilna Gaon and his Talmidim, or the Kabbalah of the Ramchal come in. And maybe if I'm of a philosophical bent, maybe even Moreh HaNevuchim of Maimonides. I'll share with you a secret. When I was a student of a Lithuanian style yeshiva, I would run away from the Beit Midrash to a place in the woods with a stream. And there were 3 books I would take with me. One was Moreh HaNevuchim of the Rambam. The second was the Tanya of Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, that's the founder of Chabad. And the third one was Likutei Moran of Reb Nachman. But eventually, things became unbearable. There were certain people in the Hanhola that explained to me that there's really no room in the yeshiva for such starry-eyed mystics or whatever, and I left. And I was very young. I was in my early 20s, and I was at a crossroads in my life. I didn't know where to turn, and I took off the shelf this volume right here, this one, Igrot Haraya, which had been entrusted to me many years earlier by my Rebbe, Rav Aaron Rakefet. At that time, he was Rothkopf. He taught me when I was 14 years old. And he said, you should study these books. But before I got around to studying those books, I had studied Vayol Moshe of Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, which I knew practically by heart. In fact, I think that's why Rakefet gave me this as a counterbalance or an antidote to Vayol Moshe of the Satmar Rebbe. But I never looked in Rav Kook for whatever reason. I was very fond of the Satmar. But now I was at a crisis in my life. I was reading anything at this point. I was reading books by Indian yogis. There's a fellow, Paramahansa Yogananda. And, when you're young and you're just, you're like a drowning man grasping at straws, you'll read anything. So I figured, you know what, it's time. I'll take a look at these volumes Rakefet entrusted to me years ago. By then, there was a thick layer of dust on it because I'd never cracked it open. I just cracked it open at random, and I started to read, and I broke down sobbing. I had a meltdown. I had a catharsis. And I felt, this is my Rebbe. This is my master. He's speaking to me. He knows exactly what I'm going through. And the message he conveyed to me is, Bezalel, there's nothing wrong with you. You're okay. He ratified my sanity, which had been called into question by various Rosh Yeshivas. He said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're fine. This thirst that you have, you want to study philosophy, you want to study Kabbalah, Hasidut, this is beautiful. They're crazy. You're normal. That's what I have to convey.
Thank you so much for sharing all of the wonderful, wonderful insight, Rabbi Naor. Greatly, greatly appreciated. I'll just add briefly.
I might sound like St. Augustine with the Confessions, my vidui.
Oh, it's very. I've been learning a lot of Likutei Moharan. It's very much in that realm. So speaking of, I'm just going to share briefly on the Rabbi Nachman end, because really this series has been looking at both Rav Kook and Rabbi Nachman's approach to particular Aggadic narratives within the Talmud, showing how they differ, showing how they align, and really putting together a picture of what Aggadah should look like in our lives. I did prepare a source sheet, though I'm not going to be quoting everything inside. If you would like to open it, I've sent it in the chat, but I'm not going to be screen sharing. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to be sharing some thoughts on Rabbi Nachman in particular, as well as on Agadah in general. And as I said, the interest in Rav Kook and Rabbi Nachman really started with me receiving a few books. I had gotten Rabbi Naor's wonderful, wonderful translation of the Legends of Rabba Bar Bar Chana from the selections from Ein Ayah that he had translated. That was really, really phenomenal. And I had also been learning Rabbi Nachman's Likutei Maharan. Likutei Maharan is the written teachings of Rabbi Nachman, and oftentimes it was on Psuki, but oftentimes it was actually on the very same stories of Rabba Bar Bar Chana in the Gemara. And he took them in similar, though different directions. Both him and Rav Kook were very Kabbalistically inclined in it, but while Rav Kook painted a very holistic picture, a picture where the takeaways from a lot of these stories was bringing everything into your life, making it a part of your trip towards serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm definitely not giving it justice. Rabbi Nachman made it much more about the tzaddik and the tzaddik's place in life, the place of vidui, the place of prayer towards redemption. But what really got me thinking, what I want to talk about for the 10 minutes that we have about, is not actually Likutei Maharan, but a book that I was sent by a friend of mine when I told him I was learning Likutei Maharan. And he said, Steve, you can't appreciate Rabbi Nachman until you've also seen the Sipurei Maaseh. And this is his collection of stories that he went around telling to people. It's actually my copy of it, and I think most copies of it is actually bilingual. It has the Hebrew translation up front for us commoners, and it has the Yiddish that it was originally spoken by Rabbi Nachman in on the bottom. You know, I spent a little bit of time at a yeshiva in Muncie, and every once in a while we'd go get lunch in Kiryas Yol, and my former Satmar friend would be translating for us, but I can't claim to speak Yiddish. But Sipurei Maaseh, these stories, what is it if not Rabbi Nachman engaging in, for what was him, a contemporary Agadic experience? He saw in the stories of Rabba Bar Bar Chana tales of what the world was like, what reality could be. And he knew that this kind of energy was something that was needed in his day for people who were never going to open a Talmud in their lives. And he told stories filled with Kabbalistic wisdom from the Zohar, from other works, in a way that was accessible and in a way that would speak to people. In the very introduction to Sipurei Maaseh goes around and it says that. It says, yes, the goal is to teach universal truths, Kabbalistic realities, but everyone who hears these is going to learn Musar from it. They're going to learn ethical lessons. Anyone who has intelligence is going to be able to take from this into their heart and bring it into their actions. That's the goal. The goal is to get this knowledge of the higher realm, but at the same time, to be able to inspire, to be able to lead you, yes, you who's reading these stories, listening to these stories, to lead a better, holier life. That's the goal. And he says in the introduction, Rav Nassan wrote the introduction, one of his students, that just before telling the first story in the book, Rabbi Nachman got up and he said that even in the stories that the world tells around us, even secular stories, they contain many hidden, lofty truths in it. And the stories, they've been spoiled because there's a lot missing from them. They get mixed up, you know, like a game of telephone. It's never going to be the same exact word 25 people later. But there's a grain of truth in there that we can bring out and bring into our lives and really use to perform, you know, real spiritual unifications, to make us more holistic people, to raise the upper realm, to bring the Shekhinah closer to us. It's very, very powerful to see that not only in the stories of the Gemara, though they are there and is there very clearly, but in the stories that we can tell in our own lives, using that as the basis. Because Rabbi Nachman saw life itself as a narrative, a beginning, a middle, and end that is a microcosm for all of Jewish history, for how the tzaddik lives. That drama is in all of our lives. And that's something that we should be finding. But it's not only there, because this kind of looking at life is actually a part of our tradition from the very beginning. Even the very first Rashi in all of Tanakh, what does Rashi say? He asks the question, why do we start with Bereshit bara Elokim? Why not just start with the very first mitzvah? Because, that's what the Torah is there, it's to teach us mitzvos. And he says, we need to start with Bereshit. We need to start with creation so that we know the history, so that we know that God chose us, that God gave us, amongst other things, the land of Israel, that we'd be able to say, this is why we are here. This is our stake in life. The stories of creation, of the avot, of the imahot, are a part of our religious narratives and our personal relationship to our religion. The Ramban says similarly. He says, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu called Moshe up the mountain, he said he was going to give him three things. He's going to give him Lukot HaEvan, he was going to give him Torah, and he's going to give him mitzvos. And the Lukot HaEvan is the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. That's fairly easy. Mitzvos is the Sefer of mitzvos, the Torah itself, what to do, what not to do. But what's Torah doing there? And he says that Torah is all of the stories, starting from Bereshit, going through the Avos, up to when we get mitzvos, and that's there to teach us derech binyanei emunah, to teach us the paths of faith. It's to show us what we believe in, why that belief is important, that which underlies all that we do, and is still itself a part of how we look at the world. It's so, so important to the Ramban, to Rashi. It's clear as day to them that that's why it's included. It's a part of it. It's built into it. And even contemporary figures, Rabbi Dr. Joshua Berman, who's a big, big Bible scholar at Bar Ilan, I believe Bar Ilan, maybe Hebrew, but I think Bar Ilan. So he writes about why there's differences in when we look at Sefer Devarim and the stories that are told there compared to when they were told earlier. And he says, based on his own research in secular fields, that one reason to potentially explain this is because Moshe needed to give Musar in a very specific way. That the Jewish people listening to Moshe when he was saying over Devarim had gone through things and made choices that the first generation didn't do. And they needed to hear it in a different way so that they could reframe themselves and know what direction to push them in their own actions. The Agadah that they hear becomes a part of how they experience the halakha that they perform. It's inherently a part of that system. I want to close with two quotes. One is actually from Rav Aaron Feldman. He's the Rosh Yeshiva at Ner Yisrael. He's been in the news for being a bit of an anti-Zionist lately, but I think we have what to learn from. It's from a book entitled The Juggler and the King, which is his translation and interpretation, or his elaboration, I should say, of the Vilna Gaon's commentaries on some of these same Agadot. And he writes in the introduction to this book that the goal that he's writing this is so it introduces the readers to the values that these Agadot teach, that there's important tools that can be found within these stories that makes them more than just the little fairy tales. Amongst other things, human success is measured in spiritual growth and refinement of character, not by amassing wealth and pleasures, but the Jewish nation's job is to study Torah and keep mitzvos in full, and to explain our function in history is remaining steadfast in the face of that which is potentially challenging us. But then he says that he will consider his entire efforts in writing this book to be failure if it offers no greater benefits than a nice literary or intellectual enjoyment, or even a feeling of spiritual elevation. Because these concepts within Torah are meant not merely to edify us, but to create mindsets which are carried into action. And the purpose of him writing that commentary on the Gruz commentary was so that people can bring it into their lives, incorporate their ideas into their hearts, minds, and everything that they perform in their day. Zagadah is not just a story. It's not just something that we tell. It's not just something we listen to. It's something that we live. It's something that we have in the background. Fairly recently, the Forbes magazine ran an article entitled "Why Every Business Needs Powerful Storytelling in Order to Grow." And there was a line there that just struck me as speaking so clearly to this endeavor, speaking so clearly to how we should look at Agadah, how we look at it aligning with halakha. It's a beautiful line. And the author of the article said, storytelling connects us, helps us make sense of the world, and communicates our values and beliefs. A good story makes us think and feel and speaks to us in ways that numbers, data, and presentation slides simply cannot. And it's a powerful notion. You know, we can all look at data. We can all look at a list of do's and don'ts, mitzvos aseh and lo ta'aseh, and we can all perform them. But at some point, it needs to be about more than just rote action. We are not only part of this grand narrative that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is out there crafting, but our job is to understand that we look at the world and we are protagonists in it, that we have lessons that we learn, lessons we incorporate into our lives from even things that seem like simple stories. Every time that we see, every time we read Superman defeating Lex Luthor, for example, every time we look in our own lives and see good triumphing over evil, where we see generosity triumphing over greed, all of that are lessons that we incorporate into ourselves and make a part of our unified whole. And this is something that Rabbi Naor pointed out that Rav Kook did tremendously, tremendously well. For Rav Kook, anything and everything could be used to build yourself up and bring holiness into the world. It could be renewed. It could be found the holiness within it and bring it out. And through that, not only make you a better person, but make the world a better place. And that is our goal in this story that we call life, to lead the world to becoming a better place. And I would argue that nothing teaches that better than looking at halakha, than looking at the stories of Rabbi Nachman, than looking just around at how the world works and the stories that are told there. It's truly, truly beautiful. So I thank everyone for going on the journey with me the past few weeks to learn the particular maisas of Rabbi Bar Chana. And I thank Rabbi Naor so much for coming and enlightening us about Rav Kook's approach in particular. If anyone has any questions, you can please feel free to ask either myself or Rabbi Naor. I know I mentioned writing in the chat, but I think we only have a few more minutes. So if anyone wants to just ask away, you're welcome to. Alrighty. Thank you.
Rabbi Naor. So I will confess that
Another confession.
Another confession. That's right. I am so accustomed to the Rav Kook's methodology of reading Agada as a literary unit, and as anybody in our synagogue has heard Levinas's Talmudic readings quoted in sermons. I read Levinas. I've read Rav Kook's Agadatas. Any Agada that I've studied was studied with that lens. What did that you mentioned that was a chiddush. So what did that contrast with? How were they studying, if at all? How were they studying Agadata before that? What were they doing if not studying it in this way? I mean, to me, it's just that's how you read them.
Look, there were commentaries. The most popular is Marsha, which is published in the back of the Talmud, Chidushei Agadot of the Marsha. Today we have Maharal, Chidushei Agadot. There's also from the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, although a lot of it is Kabbalah, which might go over one's head, but he has two sets. Each one is a multi-volume series. There's Benayahu, which is geared more to the layman, and then there's Ben Yehoyada, which is like graduate school level. But so it's not like Rav Kook is the only one to write an ongoing commentary to the Agadata, and these people are very great. Marsha, who once in a while will throw in some Kabbalah. Maharal, if there is Kabbalah, he tries to disguise it. He tries to cloak it. And the Ben Ish Chai is openly Kabbalistic. But if you didn't if you didn't put much stock in the Agadah, then, as I said, you probably would view it as a kind of random array of sayings. This rabbi says this, and that rabbi says that, and you wouldn't see it as a Platonic dialogue. Because when someone like Rav Kook gets, and certainly when Levi Nas gets through with it, it's on a par with the Platon, one of Plato's dialogues. But I just want to say something about Rabbi Nachman because Rabbi Gotlib was talking about Rabbi Nachman. Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who passed away in 1935. That's before I was born. I know I'm old, but not that old. But as I said, I had the zchut to learn with his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda. Both of them, the father and the son, were very taken by Rabbi Nachman. They were very enamored of Rabbi Nachman. And in that essay, Rav Kook's role in the rebirth of Agadah, I speak about that. Something happens to Rav Kook when he goes up to Eretz Yisrael. He came from Latvia, and he was a Rav in a couple of communities in Eastern Europe, in Zemel, and then in a larger city of Boysk. And in those days, his writing wasn't very different from the other rabbis' writings in terms of the style and perhaps even the concepts. When Rav Kook arrives in Eretz Yisrael, something very dramatic takes place in his consciousness, and it's witnessed in his writing. We say Avir Eretz Yisrael Machkim, that the air of Eretz Yisrael makes you wise. At the same time that he arrives in Yafo, he is exposed, probably for the first time in his life, to the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Now, how it came about, the Breslovers say that there was a great teacher of Breslov Hasidism. They call him Reb Avram Reb Nachman. The last name is Chazan. He was also a Levi. And according to the Breslovers, he visited Rav Kook in Yafo and exerted a profound influence on Rav Kook. And as I said, both the Rav Kook Sr. and Rav Kook Jr. were very taken with Reb Nachman. There is this statement that's attributed to Rav Kook. Somebody records it where he says, Ani Nishmat Rabbi Nachman, I'm the soul of Rabbi Nachman, whatever that means. A Talmud of his in that period, Rabbi Yisrael Porat, who went on to become the chief rabbi of Cleveland, Rabbi Israel Porath, was very close to Rav Kook in Yafo. Rav Kook was a Rav in Yafo for a decade, from 1904 to 1914. Says that in those days, the Rav Nachman's sefer never left Rav Kook's stender. It was on his stand full time. So there was that kind of immersion in Rav Nachman. But what effect does it have on Rav Kook? And that's what I wrote in that essay. I think that he begins to bare his soul. He feels that he's free to bare his soul, and you see in his writing the same kind of subjectivity and confessions, like a vidui, that you see in Likutei Moharan. The amazing thing about Rav Nachman's Sefer, Likutei Moran, it's very subjective. It's a fellow that's opening up his neshama. And, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And Rav Kook didn't have that back in Europe. For whatever reason, in Eretz Yisrael, he just starts to open up his soul.
Thank you so much once again, Rabbi Naor, for joining. I'd like to just make a reminder, I put this in the chat as well. Kodesh Press has kindly offered a 15% discount